Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Bruxelles Je t'aime, Euronews' weekly talk show about European politics. On Brussels, my love, we take a look at some European stories under discussion of late. Check what's at stake for you and for Europe. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, it was Green Week in Brussels, which means a hive of activities and debates were taking place about how to make Europe carbon neutral by 2050 and radically transform the way we eat, consume, produce, travel. But beyond Brussels, the reality on the ground is people are divided. Cheerleading for green policies does not seem to be the best way to get votes, and some European leaders have even called for a legislative pause to give industry a chance to breathe. With so much at stake and so many interests, we're asking if this is the right way to go and if nature needs a break too. And no more business as usual. A new EU plan that will be negotiated soon means all major European companies, or those doing business here in Europe, will have to make sure they don't abuse the environment or human rights while scaling up. Known as the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence, the directive, that still has many hurdles to jump, would come into effect after 2025 and see major changes for massive outlets from Apple to Primark. We take a look, see if boardrooms are in favour and ask if the European Union will really be able to crack the whip. Guests this week are Ladislav Ilčić, Croatian MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformists. You're welcome. Chloe Mikolajczak, climate and social justice activist. Good to see you.
Hi. And
Mario Nava, Director General of DG Reform at the European Commission. Thank you so much for being with us. And before we hear your views, let's just get the latest on Brussels' ambitions to go green. Christopher Pitchers reports.
The road to a carbon-neutral Europe was never going to be an easy one. But with EU elections rapidly approaching next year, tensions are rising. Most of the bloc's landmark Green Deal aimed at reaching climate neutrality by 2050 is wrapped up. But with some policies still under negotiations within the EU institutions, some people, particularly on the centre-right, see an opening. And it's an opening that could jeopardise Brussels' climate ambitions. They want to put the brakes on EU environmental laws, saying they're holding back European businesses and industry. Politicians on the other side say that this is wrong, though, and could set the EU back by years. But with so much at stake for both the environment and economy, how can each side meet in the middle and find a compromise that suits everyone?
So that is the big question, of course, here. Let's start perhaps with our MEP around the table. How do you find this compromise that is supportive of both the environment and, of course, the economy?
I will vote against it, first to say. We have already 22 regulations concerning the nature restoration, but behind all of this, there is a crucial question, crucial difference in approach. The approach I support is that we have people in the focus. And of course, if we have people in focus and we think about our children, we think also about environment and protection of the environment. But the other approach is which put a planet in the focus. And then at the end, we all, as people, seem to be parasites who put this planet in danger, which ends, for example, with different movements like antinatalism, which says that we are not supposed to have children because every child produces, 50 tons of CO2 a year. And I have to say that this approach was so unrealistic that this approach brought the European Union to energy crisis.
Okay,
because
let's hear from Chloe.
Just to explain this one. So by putting planet in the focus, they asked European countries to close all sources of energy, classical like nuclear or whatever. And then we closed these power plants faster than we established new alternative ones. And then, of course, we had the lack of energy and market reacted and the prices of energy increased. So and they really made a strong negative impact on our industry and on our people.
So that's the reality there on the ground for people back home in Croatia, for your voters. In your view, Chloe, what's your take? How can you find a compromise to keep everyone happy?
I think it's important to remember that what we're talking about here is the nature restoration law, right? And the science is very clear about what we need to do. It's not a debate about science. It's a political debate ahead of the 2024 elections. And I would love if we could actually say that it is and stop being hypocritical and stop saying it's a different approach in nature, because it's not. It's how to get votes in 2024. So the statistics and the science is very clear. 80% of EU habitats are degraded. 90% of soils are going to be depleted by 2050. So we need to act now. As you said in the intro, if we want Europe to actually achieve its climate ambition, we need nature restoration, because a lot of the carbon is actually going to be sequestrated in the soils. And what is happening now is nothing short of a propaganda effort by the Conservatives in the European Parliament, and notably the EPP, to kill the law. And it means that if we don't have this law, a lot of the other stuff that would have been voted in the past 4 years are essentially meaningless.
Last week, there was a couple of members of the European People's Party who got up and left the room. In fact, they did not want to vote on this controversial nature restoration law. And as you said there, there's a lot at stake, of course, because 81% of habitats in the European Union are in a bad state, and 1,677 species are threatened with extinction. But as you say, this is pretty tricky to get an agreement on it. And we've seen a lot of angry faces over in the European Parliament. But let's just bring in the perspective from the European Commission, Mario Nava. I know you can't comment on politics or you can't comment on specific directives, but I guess you've seen in your role a change in tune perhaps in the European Commission as well, about trying to help countries and help regions and help governments hold their hand really as they reach these ambitious goals that have been presented by Brussels, by the European Commission.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's exactly what my DG does. My DG has the role to support member states in their reforms. So there is a political decision of what should be done, and then we support. It's important to understand beyond the goals and the objective that Chloé, for example, was mentioning, that often, in order to achieve a result, like avoid a depleting of the soil, you need to make very small technical, tactical, administrative steps, like, for example, accelerating the permitting of renewables, like, for example, making sure that you have a good legislation for the environmental, for the circular economy, or whatever else. And what we are exactly doing is that. But there is a point which I think is important and was very much in your introduction. Industry and nature, they used to be actually in contradiction, but they do not necessarily need to be in contradiction. That's the great learning of the COP in Paris 7 years ago, when Europe essentially became a world leader on driving the green transition. And what the green transition is exactly that, avoiding the contradiction. The Green Deal Industrial Plan is exactly about that.
Perhaps, Mario, the problem was that they were always dealt with separately. You had climate on one hand and nature on the other, and now people are waking up and realising perhaps that they should have been dealt with together.
But the balance is important, because I completely agree this, but I would call that a propaganda, because it looks just science and data on nature. And we should also look more holistically. So what is about our industries? For example, data concerning our industry, our agriculture, the studies which were shown to us in a Committee on Agriculture showed that our production will decrease in next 4 years for 20%. And then we shall buy food from third countries which are produced on much lower ecological level. Yes, that's the truth.
That's not true. The EU impact assessment said that there's no food threat to food security.
Just to finish, we have decreased the emissions from European Union. In 1990, we produced 15% of emissions globally, and today we produce just 7%. Okay. It is both from good reasons, as Mario has told, because we developed high technologies, but also for bad reasons, because we shrinked our production, and we are weaker and weaker.
Just a reaction. The reason why we need to take such drastic measures, because they appear to be drastic for you, but I just want to remind you that you mentioned children. There's no children on a dead planet. It's as simple as that. The reason why we need to take such drastic measures, and they're not even that drastic, is because for decades, we knew since the 70s the impacts of climate breakdown. We've known for decades. For decades, political parties, inclling yours, I'm sorry to say, have blocked climate ambition and have blocked nature restoration.
As the result of what you're saying, we now reopen gas power plant in Germany as the result of this, because you're unrealistic in your approach.
We're not unrealistic.
So
we need to be fast, because for
yeah,
decades,
fast and
political
ambitious.
parties
I know
have
these
been
words.
blocking climate
I
action
know
and
these
nature
words.
action. That's a fact. I'm sorry to say.
What
That's a fact.
what is your result? Show me your result. Your result is that we are reopening gas power plants in Germany because we have the lack of energy.
I think it's
because
interesting
you
that we
brought-
go into energy debate when we talk about nature. I think
Just
it's a
one
bit
second.
interesting.
More
The
realistic,
reality
yeah.
on the ground is that EU leaders are having a hard time. They're having difficulties pushing through different measures. That's why we saw the French President, Emmanuel Macron, a couple of weeks ago, talking to the business sector and calling for a pause. Take a listen.
I'm calling for a European regulatory pause. Now we have to get on with it. We can't make further changes to the rules because we're going to lose all the players. So we need stability. Now, we need to speed up deployment, because if we don't, we run the risk of being the best in terms of regulation and the worst in terms of financing.
So he's just doing his job there, really. He's protecting the interests of France, and France...
But if I could try to get concrete in this debate, and by being concrete maybe lower a bit the temperature, it's important to understand when you have a goal like the green transition, this goal is made by individual steps. One, for example, is energy renovation or the production of energy. The other is, for example, reducing consumption, because this is something that with Repower EU we have done. The third one is, for example, building renovation. The fourth one is, for example, automotive and any other mobility measures. So I think it's very important to remain concrete, and the concreteness is what allows you to advance. And we see this in every day during our work when we work with member states. What member states ask? Member states ask, for example, to be able to give a permit for renewable energy in less time. And what citizens ask? There is a Eurobarometer of 2 weeks ago, and the Eurobarometer of 2 weeks ago asks the citizens in this Eurobarometer, they ask Europe to be able to respond in crisis.
But meanwhile, sparks are flying, and we've also heard from the Belgian Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo. He's also calling for that pause, and he said recently that reducing gashouse emissions will not be achieved by, quote, big words from Timmermans in his European bubble. For those who are not familiar with Timmermans, he's of course Frans Timmermans. He is the Executive Vice President of the European Commission in charge of the climate. Would you agree with this comment about this European bubble, Mario?
I don't agree with the European bubble. I mean, and already the proof that we are here. We live in Brussels, we live in all member states, we go on the ground. If you look
are we
my
in touch
agenda,
with the reality on the ground of companies, of business?
I do think we are in touch with the reality of companies, of business, of citizens, and that's exactly the bread and butter of our work, listening to the citizens, listening to the company, and proposing, and to the people, to the government, and proposing concrete measures for them to work better. I don't think there is a major difference on the goals, on the way we want to go. Obviously, we all like a better planet, a cleaner planet. But for example, what you said about the 15%, which is now 7%, for the good and the bad reasons. But I think if you ask Chloe and her friends, they appreciate that. But they also want Europe to take a, let me say, global responsibility and do its best to look also at the remaining 90%. I think this is the crux of the matter. The people who have marched here in Rue de la Loi for the Fridays for Future, they weren't so much interested about our 10, 12%, what it was at that time, but they wanted us to become leaders in the green transition. And I think this is the role that we have assumed after the COP in Paris, and I think is the role that we are trying to promote.
Let's just
we
get
need
a quick-
balance,
let's
of
get a
course,
quick
for that.
reaction.
But how to achieve this goal? When you look at the data, you know, among 15 first countries producing emissions, we have just Germany on 1.8%. You know, so we have to say that the standard, living standard of all other countries are lower than in European Union. They don't care about, they care about surviving. And if we become weaker in industry, our influence, our impact on other countries will be lower. So it is not the way that we destroy our industry. And
we're not destroying our industry. We're not destroying industry. I think it's important to say
of course we are
That's the message
destroying.
that industry, when they
Who
meet in
supports-
Brussels,
but which
they are
industry?
saying that the European Commission is shooting itself in the foot with all this
Of course
regulation.
we
No,
do.
That's
which
what industry is saying.
Which industry? I think it's important to look at which industry. I think we can all agree, maybe around this table, that we need to go beyond fossil fuels, right? Because they're the primary driver of greenhouse gas emissions. Look at the industries that are promoting renewable energy today. Wind Europe, Solar Europe, Eurelectric. like literally the lobbies of the renewable energy
of course,
industry.
you help them develop.
They're all
you
in
help
favor.
them, of course.
They all came out in favor of the nature restoration law. All of them.
Of
all of
course,
them came
because-
out and said
because you
nature
put-
restoration goes hand in hand
You
with
give
climate action.
them
but
a
meanwhile-
lot
All
of
of them.
money, a lot of
All of
money,
them
our
came out.
money.
You
or
just
of
said that they were
our-
against. You're killing them.
or-
But
But meanwhile, the
Sometimes
European
it's
People's
supporting.
Party, let's bring in the perspective of the European People's Party. They couldn't be with us on the show this week because they're in Rome for their study days. But they're very concerned about this proposal on the nature restoration law. And we spoke yesterday to Esther de Lange, a Dutch MEP, and asked her why. Take a listen.
I've been in this House for 16 years and I've never put forward a proposal that says rejects the Commission proposal. I'm normally at the table negotiating on behalf of my group, but I have serious concerns about piling this piece of legislation on top of Nature 2000. The reason why we're asking to retire the proposal is because it doesn't give a clear answer on the impact on the cost of living and overall inflation. Our citizens are worried about this and they want answers about this. So we want these answers first. We're not signing a blind check.
Quick reaction, Chloe?
You know what's actually is going to drive prices up in the next few years? Climate breakdown, biodiversity collapse. Because we know this is what's going to threaten food security. We know this is what's going to threaten a lot of other stuff that people buy on a daily basis. These are the main threats today to the cost of living. And if we don't act now, and I just want to say, I hear all these leaders who said they're in favor of climate action. You know, De Croo said that to us in our face. Yeah. You know, Macron said that to us, said that the next 5 years will be ecological or it won't be.
And let's take
what's just happening is that these people that say they're in favor of climate action, they're now asking for a pause on nature restoration. When we know this is the science that's selling it. It's not us. Science is telling us that.
Just to say, I have on my house solar panels and heat pumps. So I really care about environment and I really care about that, but not on this unrealistic way. We have now the change which is happening with both People's Party and Liberals, who I have to say supported all of these green transitions, brought us, which brought us to this problematic situation. Now they are slowly changing their mind because they see that it brings nowhere. It brings also to the much worse position concerning environment, as I told before, with the reopening of the coal power plant.
Mario Nava, we need to bring in your perspective as well here from the Commission. I think what we're discussing here around the table is quite reflective of the conversations that were had this week in Green Week. These are the realities on the ground, the difficulties that you're trying to help.
That's exactly the point. I mean, nobody is denying the difficulties. What I was just saying is that we need to look, and that's what we do in my DG, at each and every measure that we can do. And I've seen working on the ground with the public administrations of the member states that is, for example, possible to accelerate the renewable permit. It's, for example, possible to have a law on circular economy. It's, for example, possible to have a green budgeting. We have done a huge project with green budgeting last year. So I think this is the green and the digital transition are clearly the flagship of Europe. We are known for that, and I think our ability to somehow lead the debate has been recognized. So I really call for a work with the public administrations in the member states where many things becomes possible.
Just one reaction. You mentioned that the EPP and Renew were actually supportive of all these previous green regulations, right? And a survey, not a survey, an analysis by Bloom, which is a French NGO working on fisheries and climate, has just came out this week and has shown that in the past 5 years,
we have it
EPP,
right here.
Exactly, EPP was actually the worst party when it came to green regulations. And what is happening now, the reason why what they're backing off is very simple. It's because there are elections. There are elections next year, and there are synergies and alliances that are currently being made ahead of the elections.
Let's just show it to our viewers. I mean, this is not from Euronews. This is from Bloom, in fact, and they are calling the left, the Social Democrats and the Greens the Earth champions. They're calling Renew Europe the flip-floppers, and they're calling the European People's Party and your group, the ECR and ID, the planet destroyers. What would you say to them?
Of course, they simply approach this question from this dogmatic approach that anyone who don't put these fast, ambitious goals, which actually destroy both economy, both our planet, are now the world saviors, and we are world or environment destroyers. So it is, I have to say, sorry for using this word, stupid, because we cannot, our approach cannot be in strengthening industries outside the European Union, producing much, because they don't have our technologies. So when they produce something instead of us, there will be much more emissions than if we do.
I'm going to have to stop you there. We're out of time. Fascinating topic, so much to talk about, but I'm afraid we will come back to it on another show. Thank you so much to you all for your insights, and thank you for watching. Stay with us after the break. We'll be looking at some other issues regarding that green transition. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon. Now, the European Parliament has voted to kickstart negotiations on a plan that would call out massive companies for their negative social and environmental impact. Known as corporate sustainability due diligence, it could even include sanctions that could seriously damage the reputation of these companies, from naming and shaming to taking goods off the markets and even fines. It looks like this directive could have real teeth. Is this a big deal? Chloe, do you think it could change the way businesses, outlets do business?
I think it's massive, and I think it's about time that it comes into a law, because we've had so many scandals and so many terrible events, such as the Rana Plaza, such as oil spills happening elsewhere, which were the responsibility of European companies, and they were never held accountable. So I think it's really great that it's finally on the table. I think the position of the Parliament is definitely a great step forward. Obviously, there's many loopholes, but that's always the case. And I really hope that in the negotiations between the Commission, the Council and the Parliament, we're going to have what was put forward conserved, but also something are going to be strengthened. I just want to give a quick example. The inclusion of climate, for instance, in this law was great, but it's only going to be applicable to the majority of companies by 2028, which is too late for the EU's climate commitment.
How did you vote on that directive?
Of course, against. So I used to live in Yugoslavia. And during communist time, they also wanted to impose some of their values, like equality, brotherhood, and so. And they imposed that to all market and to all firms, and just firms who were in line with these values could prosper. At the end, Yugoslav economy bankrupt, and that is what is going to happen if European Union continuously will go in this direction of socialism, of imposing some values to the economy. So we have over-regulation first. Then this approach decreases the importance of consumers. For example, I think that, for example, stores shouldn't work on Sundays. I don't go to shop on Sundays.
Let's just hear from the European Commission.
Because it is importance of consumers, and they ignore that. And they think that politicians could solve every problem and to impose to economy, and actually they are destroying companies with this regulation.
Mario, I know this is not your field, because of course you focus on the public sector, not the private sector. But do you feel there's a major change in the Commission regarding EU funding and supporting projects and making sure that they don't harm the environment as they go along?
I think there are a number of areas where we have the environment in mind. I mean, let's mention, for example, the ESG area, the environmental, social and governance. Let's mention the area of the green budgeting. Let's mention the general principle that we have had in the RRF of the do no significant harm. So I think the general environmental tension and leadership of Europe is not under discussion. What we are discussing here is, however, to be able to keep that in front of difficulties. Let me make a very clear example. COVID and the war have shown that our supply side is fragile. The COVID broke up the supply side, and then the war also put the supply side in danger. So circular economy can become very useful in order to restore the supply side. And I think is the link between those issues. Another link to which I'm very much attached personally is the one of energy. Avoid that the green transition becomes divisive from an income point of view. So making sure that
it could make Europe bankrupt. And in fact, we did want to ask certain companies who would be impacted by this, but they did not have anyone available. But Oxfam were available to speak to us. We can listen to them now.
This piece of legislation is really very important. This law is about making business accountable for what's happening in their supply chain. What's on the table is a necessary first step to tackle the very serious violations of human rights that are happening where people produce our food, where people make our clothes. We think that what was adopted last week is far from perfect. Too many companies are left out. What's been adopted is wishy-washy on finance. So for a number of reasons, we are worried. But it's a good starting point, and this process needs to go forward as soon as possible.
So good, Chloe?
Yeah, but I mean, the truth is the market doesn't regulate itself. We've seen it over and over again. We've seen a lot of voluntary measures, a lot of voluntary commitments from companies, from banks, etc. And we're in the situation that we're in, which is a climate crisis, an environmental crisis. Human rights abuses are still happening, as was said in your interview. So I think it's sort of insane that we have politicians that tell us that we need to put the economy above human rights, and that it's bad that we actually want to hold companies accountable for the human rights abuses and environmental abuses that are happening in the supply chain. This should be the basis. This should have been a regulation that should have been adopted decades ago, because we still have these human rights abuses. We still have these climate and environmental abuses in the supply chain. So it's essentially, it's just the basis that we should have.
If you come to one big firm and tell them, you know, you must have this gender equality in your board. You have to have so many women, so many homosexuals, bisexuals, so this or that, you know. First, what you do, you ignore the criteria of quality, because every employee should improve their career just according to their quality, and not just because he's homosexual or woman or whatever. So this, what they do now with this, is burdening European economy with burdens which other countries don't have, and we cannot be competitive to all others.
But it's also about improving the conditions. If you take a look at garment workers, for example, the conditions they're facing in countries like Bulgaria, Romania and Croatia, in your country, of course, we were looking at the figures, and they're being paid like 418 euros, 223 euros below the poverty line. That's a threshold of family of four, and that's where EU can come in.
You know, I was union representative in my work before for 17 years. You don't have to tell me about what is just, but the question is how to achieve that. Who will pay the minimum salary? Who will pay the equal salary what they want in European
Mario,
creation
you're in
government?
charge of the recovery funds, the resilient funds, the reforms. Who will pay?
I'm in charge of helping member states to do that. But I think the fact that till now the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which as you know is made by financing on the markets, because the European Union issues on the market, until now the market responded positively. It means that the overall goals that we want to achieve with the Recovery and Resilience Funds are appreciated by the markets. The markets has put the money where the mouth is. There is no doubt on that.
Okay, and of course cutting red tape, another area that you are focusing on. But I'm afraid that is all we have time for on that topic. I wish we had more, because there's a lot to discuss, but we'll come back to it on another show. Thank you so much to our guests, and thank you so much for watching. Stay with us here on Euronews, and of course check out euronews.com. Hi there, and welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but it's exactly 1 year till the European Parliament elections. And what will make these elections a little bit different is Belgium has decided to join Austria, Greece, Malta and Germany in lowering the voting age to 16. To find out how people here in Brussels feel about that, I popped into a local secondary school, Emile Jacquemin, to hear what the mood is around this newfound right to vote.
I think it's a really good idea, because it means that we can actually change what we want to change, and so the matters that we find important, we can actually have a voice, and so vote for parties or people that we think would carry these values. So, for example, in our class, climate change is quite important, or women's rights, and so people can actually use their voice to further these ideas.
I would like to vote. I think it's really interesting because obviously we're quite young, but we're an age that we start thinking about things like that and we want to change our future.
I think it's a great idea. It allows young people to express themselves. It's especially important at the moment because it concerns us as much as it does adults.
I think it gives us maturity and also makes young people more aware of their responsibility to take an interest in Europe and political parties.
Mario Nava, what do you think? People are pretty enthused there. Are you surprised?
Well, no, not at all. The European Commission, our flagship initiative is called Next Generation EU. So the fact that the Next Generation EU are those who have 16 today can vote, I think this is good. It's also good from probably a political point of view, but also an economic point of view, because we know that the transition will require new skills, we require new jobs. The transition is producing new jobs. Think of the renewable industry or the circular industry or many others. So it's excellent that we have the young one who can really support that.
Chloe, you're a bit of an influencer online on social media. Do your followers applaud this move of voting at 16?
Activist. Yeah, I mean, one of my main mission is really to mainstream European politics. So that is amazing to a young audience. I would have loved to be able to vote at 16. I think it would have made my journey into activism much easier, into political activism. From what I've seen around me, people are super happy, but there's also a little bit of lack of knowledge that this is the case. I think the Belgian government is going to have to communicate a lot more, because a lot of people are not aware. And I think...
And the German government, because Germany will allow as well these voters at 16 to
that would be amazing.
Get registered.
Yeah.
Now, I visited a school, of course, here in Brussels. Do you think the situation would have been the same if I visited a school in your constituency? Do you think there would be as much enthusiasm? What's your take?
Yes, according to all polls, surprisingly, the right-wing parties who are brave enough to fight the mainstream, which, as I said, doesn't bring good results, will vote for the right-wing parties. And that is something what is encouraging me concerning this. But on the other hand, I would really like to make this possibility to vote to all people, even for, when you have a child of 5 years, who is 5 years old, he pays the taxes, or their parents pay the taxes. So they are members of the society. But then, of course, there is a question, who is mature enough to vote? And according to all data, young people become mature later than before. So it is questionable when this should happen. I would also be brave to say that I would establish also family voting. I don't know if you know the project, the proposal that parents vote for their children. Well, that is also the possibility. Oh. But yeah, that is important.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's just take a look quickly. We have we're running out of time, but there was new data as well this week published that showed EU attitudes towards those elections, and only 0.5% of respondents said they're interested in the European elections. But it's rising a little bit. It has been.
I think it's just because it's really complicated and really opaque, let's be honest. So I think we need more initiatives that really mainstream European politics, that mainstream the EU decision-making process, and that really allow people to get involved in that EU decision-making process. Because a lot of the time, the moment where people get active is usually at the European Parliament level, when they can influence the MEPs. But very few people know that they can participate in public consultation at the Commission level, etc. So I think we really need to explain more, essentially.
Okay, we'll be a busy year. I'll have to stop you there. We're out of time, I'm afraid. But thank you so much to our panel for joining us. And thank you so much for watching us. Get in touch. Reach out to us here on Brussels. My love at Euronews.com. We're also on social media, Instagram and Twitter. See you soon here on Euronews and Euronews.com.